Hello everyone and welcome to another really awesome game from yesterday's match between Esipenko and the Magnus Carlsen. Even though we already know the result of the match, a lot of you have requested this one since it's the only game that Magnus lost in the tournament so far, and it's a really enjoyable one. A really complicated one since it's a rapid game, players don't have all that much time, but at some point they got so low on time that, they started making all sorts of moves, which is kind of great, so let's check it out. So Esipenko with the white pieces opens with e4, and this is a game. If you remember from yesterday, the two classical games were drawn. Then in the slower rapid games, both slower rapid games were drawn, and then we have the faster rapid games where Magnus won the first game, and now this is the second game of the rapids. This game, Esipenko simply must win to force the going further down the rabbit hole of the tiebreaks into the blitz section, and well, he has the white pieces. It's all on him, and well, we already know what happened, but let's see how it happened. So e4, we have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and the bishop to c4. We have bishop to c5, and now the great Sun Tzu, of course, said that b4 is the strongest idea here, but Esipenko goes for the more cautious c3, of course, the main line of the Giuoco Piano. We have knight to f6, and now d3. We have d6, and here castle. So pretty much whenever we will have this main line of the Giuoco Piano, the moves will be pretty much the same, all very useful moves. h6, rook to e1, castles, we're gonna have h3, so just, normal moves, improving your position little by little. Bishop to b6, not allowing any attacks to come with an attack on the bishop, and now knight b to d2, preparing knight to f1, the bishop coming to e3, and so on. So knight to e7 by Magnus, and now a4, and this a4 is the so-called Peter Svidler move. Only Peter Svidler played it so far. He played it twice, once against Fabiano Caruana, once against Wesley So, and he did not achieve any victories with it, but he did get a draw against Wesley. Here against Fabi played a5, and Fabi won the game with the black pieces, but here we have c6. Magnus continues in the same fashion that Wesley continued against Svidler. We have d4, knight to g6, and now bishop back to f1. You will often see this bishop to f1 retreat, and if you wonder why that is, well, if white continues developing as white should, for example, in this line, let's say queen to c2, now we can force a trade. E captures, c captures, and push d5, and because the bishop is here, we don't have the option of just keeping the center closed and advance our pawn in the center with e5. We have to react to this either by capturing or by moving the bishop, so it's not that great. By playing bishop to f1 first, now if such an idea happens, d5, we can advance our pawn to e5. So this bishop is tucked in for to be used later on. So here we have rook to e8, queen to c2, and now bishop to c7. And in the game that we already mentioned, Peter Svidler against Wesley So, d captures on e5 was played. The game ended in a draw. It was this year in the Grand Chess Tour Rapid in Paris. But here we have b4, a few moves too late, but it is now already as of move 14 that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Magnus deals with this novelty. We have bishop to e6, continuing development, and now bishop to b2. We have a5 now by Magnus, trying to undermine this structure on the queen side, and of course b5, grabbing more space in the center on the queen side. And if you trade here, captures, we don't capture right away. We first play d5. That's kind of the idea. And after the bishop moves, then a captures on b5, and Carlsen's bishops will not be all that impressive here. Maybe you could always place the bishop on b6, but this d6 pawn will become weak. So it has definitely has its merits. So instead, after this b5 move, we have bishop to b6 right away by Magnus, and now bishop to a3, putting pressure on this pawn here. Later on, maybe you can get a knight to f5 to further attack this pawn. We have queen to c7, developing the queen, preparing to maybe bring the other rook into the game, and now rook 8 to b1. If this ever opens up, then you will already have a nice attack on some of black's pieces here. So c captures on b5, and now not capturing with the pawn, but now bishop captures on b5. Our good friend the bishop returns and is now doing well, great things here. He's already attacking the rook, and you don't really have all that many options here. If you try bishop to d7, you would definitely want to trade off your light square bishop because it's not doing all that much here. There's a bishop captures on d6. That's the problem. And now if the queen captures, we're gonna play knight to c4 now, and we're gonna have a double attack on the queen and on the bishop. And once the queen moves, we're gonna capture on b6, and now it doesn't matter if queen captures, for example, on b6. We just play bishop captures on b7, and we have a winning attack here. So instead, after bishop captures on b5, Magnus just moves the rook, rook e to c8, and now comes d5. Grabbing more space in the center. Bishop back to d7. Now black dreams of trading off this light square bishop, but Esipenko just, tucks it back in. Bishop back to f1. So look at this bishop, how it's doing great things, and look at the one, if you remember, from Vidit's game. And now, again, what do you do? It's a very, very critical moment. Every moment in this game is critical, and Magnus would probably have to play something like bishop to c5, get the rook away, bishop away from that b6 square, try and trade off the dark square bishops, but then, for example, captures, and now if you capture with the queen, you lose the b7 pawn, and if you capture with the pawn, we're just going to play rook b2, bring the other rook over to b1, and have a lot of pressure here along the b file. So Magnus first plays rook a to b8. Now he adds a defender here, so he will be able to capture with the queen, but now comes knight to c4. Very nicely done. The bishop now attacked twice, so bishop to c5, and now bishop captures, queen captures, and rook to b6. A very nice rook lift by Esipenko, now with a double attack on the d6 pawn. So knight to e8, only way to guard the pawn, and now comes rook e to b1. So what do you play here? We have queen back to c7. Now the b7 pawn is attacked twice, so queen to c7, and now queen to b3, adding more pressure here on the b7 square. We have queen to d8. Magnus kind of hoping that Esipenko will go for a nice capture here, but he doesn't. But it's interesting. If rook captures, and queen captures, then Magnus can grab this a4 pawn, and yes, you will lose the a5 pawn, and Esipenko will be up a pawn, but Magnus is hoping that he can survive this. He won the previous game, so he only needs a draw in this one to win the match, and it's not going to be easy, but this is what he's hoping for. But Esipenko just keeps the pressure. He doesn't even grab the a5 pawn right away. He plays queen to a3, adds a third attacker to the pawn here, and now there's really no defending this. Magnus played queen to f6, but now comes knight captures on d6. We have knight captures, rook captures, and now queen to e7. And now, okay, this rook now can't really move because the queen would hang here, but Esipenko just brings the other rook to b6. So rook b to b6, and now what do you play here? Well, here we have f6 by Magnus, strengthening the center a little bit, and he's trying to get some counterplay here, but it's not easy. So here, best for Esipenko would be to advance the pawn, c4, c5, and there's really not much Magnus can do here. But he played queen to a1, and now he gives Magnus some room to breathe. So Magnus goes knight to h8. The knight is now coming to f7 to attack this rook. So now there's really no good way to handle this, apart from the one way, and that is bishop to b5. Our good friend the bishop again joins the game, and now there's the threat of just rook captures bishop here. So bishop captures on b5, but now not capturing right away because you lose the rook, or not capturing with this pawn because you don't want to mess up your pawn structure. First, rook to e6. Attack the queen here, queen to c5, and now we're going to capture this with the rook again while keeping some pressure. And the problem is you can't capture the c3 pawn here because of the very nasty rook to e8 check, and that's it. If you capture the rook, you lose the queen, and if you play king to f7, we're just going to capture the queen, and then, of course, if black captures, we're going to capture the rook on b8, and at the end of this very nice line, we're going to be up a whole rook. So after rook captures on b5, Magnus goes queen to c4, the c3 pawn cannot be captured, and now comes queen to e1. Queen to b1 to put more pressure on b7 is also one very nice way to go, but here we have queen to e1, and now knight to f7. Magnus gets a chance to activate his knight. We have rook captures on a5, and now comes, I think, the most incredible moment in the game. Magnus played queen captures on c3. And we just said that queen captures on c3 is impossible because, well, just rook to e8 check, and there's no move you can play. If the rook captures, you lose the queen, and if you move the king, king h7, we just capture the queen, and then after rook captures, we pick up this rook, and there's nothing for black to hope for. He's down a rook. But incredible as it is, the players were very low on time, and Magnus, I guess, kind of played it very confidently. So Esipenko completely missed this idea. Esipenko traded queens, we have rook captures, and now rook to b5. And all of a sudden, Magnus is back in the game. He's down a pawn, but I mean, it's a very, very complicated endgame. Maybe not as complicated, but two rooks. I mean, it's always complicated, and they are both very low on time. So rook to c4, Esipenko goes after the pawns here, and now a5. Magnus goes after the pawns. We have a5. Esipenko now preparing a6 to win the b7 pawn. You're not going to be able to capture, so there's no time for rook captures on e4. So rook to f8. Now trying to trick Esipenko, because if he captures knight to d8, just wins the exchange here, and then Magnus definitely gets a draw. But after rook to f8, we have knight to h4. Now the knight is coming to g6. You're going to kick away the rook from there. You're going to put both of your rooks on the 7th rank, and then it's just game over. So Magnus tries knight to d8, attacks the rook, defends the b7 pawn, and now comes rook to e7. So getting closer to your goal. Rook to f7, and now rook to e8 check. Now you're going to lose the knight if you don't block with the rook. So rook to e8, rook to f8, and now Esipenko trades. We have captures, and now f3, strengthening that e4 pawn. So what do you play here? Well, rook to c7, going back to, well, help out with the defense of the pawn. Maybe the knight can now be activated. But knight to f5 now. And again, what can you play here? It's such an ugly position for black. Magnus tries h5, but now just rook to b6, simply grabbing more space here. King to e8, and now comes g4. We have captures, and now what do you play with black? There's really nothing to play. If this knight moves, it's not going to be that great. You're going to weaken this pawn. For example, if you go knight to f7, we can simply capture the g7 pawn because the rook no longer defends it, and there's really not all that much. If you play king to f8 to maybe try activate this way, then knight to d6. Now this pawn is attacked twice, and there really are no moves for black to make here. We're just gonna make our way in with the king very easily and win the game. So after h captures on g4, we have g6 by Magnus, but now knight back to h4, attacking the pawn once again. And if g5, then it's pretty much the same thing. Knight f5, and black has no moves. You're gonna have to play something like king f7, then rook d6, attacks the knight, rook c8, and again everything is completely stuck here. You're free to get your king into the game, play something like rook d7 check, pick up the pawn, and so on. So here, after knight to h4, we have rook to h7 by Magnus, giving up the g6 pawn with a very nice idea in mind, but Esipenko doesn't fall for it. He goes after the pawn, even though it looks like your knight will be trapped. So knight captures on g6, king f7 by Magnus, now seemingly trapping the knight, but not really. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the way out of this position for Esipenko while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding f4. That's an okay move. But for those of you who really solved the position, congratulations on finding rook to d6, because now there's no way to defend this knight. The knight will fall. The knight has no squares to go to, and you can't help out with the defense of the knight. This is impossible because the knight covers that. Sorry, the knight covers the e7 square, and of course the h8 is also covered. So there's no move for black here other than to just capture this knight. So king captures, we have rook captures on d8, and now it's a rook and pawn endgame, but Esipenko is up 2 pawns, so that's not 1 pawn. 2 pawns is a lot. So rook to c7 by Magnus, now comes king f2. Now, of course, we have to bring our king into the game. Rook to c5, going after the a5 pawn. Now d6 is coming. And of course, if you capture the pawn, d7, and that's it. There's no stopping the pawn. You cannot go d5. Rook g8 check, followed by queening, and that's it. So instead, after d6, we have rook to c2 check by Magnus, king g3, now comes rook to d2, putting the rook behind the passed pawn, but now d7. Now the threat is just delivering check and promoting the pawn to a queen. So king f7, not allowing this check, and now rook to h8. Esipenko shows that he is also a master of the endgame. Now he's threatening just to bring the queen into the game, and of course, if rook captures, which is the only move, otherwise, queening is coming, the king and pawn endgame will be winning for him. So rook captures, Magnus wins back his pawn. Rook to h7 check, king to e6, now rook captures on d7. King captures, and now the position is as it is. Esipenko is up only one pawn, but it is one pawn that's more than enough. So here Esipenko played the g5. There are a lot of ways to play this game. G5, I think the most straightforward one. He just makes room for his king to enter deeper into the position and just threatening to, further increase his lead here, because I don't know if you guys remember that I say it like every 100 videos, but it's having 2 pawns against 1 is better than having 3 pawns against 2, and it goes 3 pawns against 2 is better than 4 pawns against 3, then 4 pawns then 5 pawns against 4, then 6. The lower you go, the bigger your advantage gets. So here, of course, trading is definitely in his favor. So f captures on g5, king to g4 now. Now we're going to reclaim the pawn, and it doesn't matter what Magnus does here. King to c6, we have king to f5, not bothering with this pawn, but rather we're going to capture this one and keep an eye on the black king. So king b5, we're going to capture this pawn. King captures on a5, now king to d6. And this is now, of course, completely winning for us. You might have some problems if you play something like king to f5. Might be a bit tricky because, the black will also start pushing and he's gonna queen with check. So could be winning, but you still have to be very careful. So after this, we have king to d6, and it was in this position on move 64 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. It's a very poetic move, and it's the greatest move to resign on move 64, why not? But I will show why he resigned, because it's very, very cool. So b5, e5, we're going to play b4, e6, b3, e7, b2, white queens, black queens. But now, even though the material is completely equal, we have a very simple win. Queen to a8 check, the king has to go to the b file. King b5, b6, or b4 doesn't really matter. We're going to deliver check, and once the king moves, we are one square too short to defend the black queen. Queen captures on b1, and that's it. That's why Magnus resigned, and what a win for Andrey Esipenko. So it was really, really incredible. He forced the blitz tiebreaks, but then in the blitz tiebreaks, Magnus was better, and that was, it was simply an epic match because it took Magnus 8 games to take down Esipenko, which is quite a lot. So prior to this game, Esipenko played only 1 game against Magnus, which he won, but now he got to play 8 more games against Magnus, and he also got this other win. So great things happening for Esipenko in the future. Looking very much forward to seeing more of his games. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you don't remember from the previous video, these are the pairings for today. Today's classical games. Carlsen will face Etienne Bacro, Duda will face Virit, Feroseev will face Tabatabai, and Karakin will face Shankland. So there you have it. More action to be seen today. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank David Kimura, Thomas Jenkins, Parmenion Kotsugeorgos, Shibin James, and Yaroslav Lubelski for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE World Cup until it ends. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And sorry for a bit of a longer video, but the game deserved it. See you soon.